This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Weirding Way Media.
Welcome to episode 120 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning, and I'm your host for the next hour or so. Thanks for joining me. If this is your first time here, you're very welcome, of course. You've got just about an hour of behind-the-scenes chat ahead of you, and you've got another 119 episodes to check out. Quite envious, really. There's a lot of good stuff in there, even if I do say so myself. If you're a regular, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. Sorry for my slightly stuffy voice. I've got a bit of a cold at the moment. And welcome to the 112 patrons that help support the podcast. I really do need to double that to at least 224, 250, 300 would be amazing to make sure this is a financially viable endeavor. I'm not talking about profit here. I'm talking about breaking even at the moment, but you know, if I can double it, then there would be some profit. Profit would be a nice thing. So you know how you tap your phone on the machine in the coffee shop and you don't even look at the amount? Well, for about that same amount, $12, you could fund an entire year of podcasts. Your help would be very much appreciated. You'll also get an ad-free version of each episode on the lowest tier. There are more tiers with more perks. But imagine that, an ad-free version. So no distractions, just great conversations. If you can't do that, please do leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It would be great to help to get this podcast to more ears. I know I say this every time, and I know you probably just let it go by every time. But listen, if you could just stop now, stop this podcast, go to Apple Podcasts, just write a quick 5-star review, some nice words, hopefully. It'll take you all of 2 minutes, and then you can hit play again. I mean, you could do it while you're still listening, actually. But I'd really appreciate it. It would make such a difference. There's so many big podcasts out there burying these small independent podcasts like mine. It's just me. That's it. I do everything. So I'd really appreciate your help. While I have you here, a reminder that you can still go to colincantwell.com and get some money off any of the items with the code FILM15. That's FILM 15. Go check it out. They have prints, they have mugs, maybe even t-shirts now. Lots of cool stuff anyway. So yeah, film15 at colincantwell.com. Okay, today I'm talking to somebody whose name you might not have heard of, but whose work you've definitely seen. Her name is Maryan Infield. She was known back in the 80s, the period of time that we're talking about in this conversation, as Maryan Evans. So Maryan started out in the film industry in the early 80s, navigating a world which at the time didn't have many women behind the camera, particularly in the effects world. And she got her break at ILM, working as an assistant camera operator on Return of the Jedi, where she was part of the team capturing all of the visual effects that brought all of those amazing sequences to life. She also worked at Apogee and Boss Film Studios on projects like Life Force, Never Say Never Again, and Dune. And in our conversation, Maryan shares her journey from film school to ILM, how she convinced the right people to give her a shot, and what it was like working with legends like Ken Ralston and Dennis Muren. She talks about some of the inventive problem solving that went into capturing those iconic shots, including the hyperspace effect in Return of the Jedi. Some stories I'd not heard about that film. Given that I wrote a book, I was quite surprised by that. So JediTimeline.com, still available, by the way. We also got into what the working atmosphere at ILM was like, and how it compared to those other effects houses, and what it was like being one of the few women in a very male-dominated department. So here's my chat with Maryan Infield, and as always, I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Maryan, thanks for joining me. As I said before we hit record here, it was difficult to find out information about you. IMDb isn't that forthcoming. I think it has Life Force and Return of the Jedi on there. Look, can you tell me first of all, how you got into the industry? What was your entry point?
Well, I finished film school at USC and got out and realized very quickly that the best jobs were all union jobs. However, this was 1981, and getting into 659, which is the cameraman's local, especially for someone like me, was next to impossible. So I needed an angle. I needed a specialty to get myself in. There's two ways to get in. You could get into special effects camera or live action. Since live action was fairly new, it looked like a really good chance that I could swing it. So after USC, I worked for a title house in Hollywood. And it just so happens that we had two Oxbury stands, animation stands, and then we had a studio with the 25-foot camera track. So these two gentlemen came in one night, and they persuaded my boss to let them work at night in the studio. And with them, they brought, which I had never seen before, and none of my coworkers had. We were mesmerized. This motion control system, which was crazy, because everything we shot on Oxbury was by a foot pedal or, pretty much manually. So I thought, this is my ticket. And I persuaded these two guys to let me work as an intern. So I worked title house in the day and I worked title house at night. And I did anything these guys wanted. I was their gopher, food, beer, you name it. And they taught me how this system worked. And it wasn't before long I realized, because effects pictures were just starting to really, some of them were super cheesy, of course. But I didn't want the non-union work. That would not get me into the union. So if I learned this system, that was it. And I did. And I put together a small reel, and it was cheesy, maybe. But I had read in Variety, maybe I worked for these guys maybe 3 months at night. And then I read in Variety that Jedi was gearing up. So I got on the phone back in those days. I got on the phone and I called ILM. And I spoke to a woman by the name of Rose Duganin.
Yeah, I know Rose.
Yeah, wonderful.
Rose. Yeah.
She thought I was lying. I said, I know how to work this stuff. And I explained, and she said, okay, well, you've got an art school background. I did shoot for a year for the May Company as a catalog photographer, so I could light. So I had that kind of information and skills in my portfolio. I flew out to San Anselmo. I had an interview. They hired me, and I was in the union. That's it. Yeah, that was the beginning.
It does. It did take that then, didn't it, to make a telephone call and have a conversation with somebody and try and convince them? Because I imagine still in 1981, 82, it was still a relatively small pool of people that had motion control experience.
Oh, very, very, very small. And for someone like myself, a woman, you know, they didn't believe it. They didn't believe it. And to tell you the truth, I don't blame them because I showed up on the scene, but I had a very strong art and photography background. I knew how to light. I had a good eye for art and design. I was definitely great for the job, and couldn't have been happier. I loved it, loved it, loved it.
Do you remember your first day there at ILM? Was this at the was it? So were you Marin County by then, or were you?
Oh
No,
yeah,
you would have been.
in Marin County,
Yeah,
on the stages at Kerner Boulevard,
Kona, yeah.
which was like an industrial type warehouse studio
Yeah.
setup. But I can remember walking in there and them asking me what I was selling. So they really thought I was a vendor. And
Mm,
I told them I was, their work. And then I was assigned to a specific camera crew. We worked 2 assistants, and then we had our operator. And under that crew, we worked under a main supervisor, Ken Ralston, Dennis Maryan, and I worked basically under Ken Ralston. And my supervisor was Don Dow, fabulous
mm-hmm.
guy. My assistant was Peter Dalton, another great guy. And I walked into stages that were full of honest to God puppets and big these jerry rig kind of wonderful setup, cloud tanks, and it was I couldn't I didn't sleep for I think a week. I was just I loved it. I was thrilled to be there with all of those super creative people.
Yeah, and by this time, if my memory serves, ILM had kind of diversified from doing just Star Wars movies, and they were doing things like, Indiana Jones and Poltergeist and all those,
Right.
all those other filmmakers were coming to ILM by that point. So you really kind of joined at a sweet spot there in a way.
Me.
And what was the first? And was Jedi the first film that you got involved with when you were there? Is that what you were employed purely
That's what
for?
I
That
was hired to do.
Mm.
However, the wonderful thing about working up in Marin County, for ILM especially, is they were so terrific about letting you. I worked in the art department because I had an art background. I did storyboards. When we weren't shooting, I could go and work in the creature department. They would transfer you over. So when we had different projects and the stages were tied up, I did a C3PO commercial, serial commercial, all kinds of promos. They would just move you back and forth. Now, if I was in LA, that could not happen because you had to stick to either a second assistant, a first assistant, or an operator. So when our operator got sick, Peter and I operated. I assisted, he operated. I operated, he assisted. But we all took a part in this 3-man team, lighting, shooting, working with the optical department, running BiPACs on the Moviola to check our status with the different levels of BiPAC that go in the opticals. So it was an incredible education. And also, Jamie, you have to realize this was like a city. ILM had a creature department, a wardrobe department, an optical department. If you had something wrong with your camera, you didn't have to go to Panavision or Aeroflex. It was in-house. Everything was in-house with top creative people. And then we had access to the Foley soundstage, which was at Skywalker Ranch. And that was another education. So it was 7 days a week I worked, and it was wonderful.
And when you were working on Return of the Jedi, then was there a particular shot that or a number of shots that you were working on at that time that you came? You said Ken was above you, and you had your team below that doing those shots. Was there a particular shot you remember, or something that was particularly challenging? Because that had some big shots in it, that movie.
Oh yeah. The hyperspace shot. We had a 40-foot camera track, and that was a huge challenge to make that work. The first couple times that we tried to shoot it, we thought we'd have to bypack it. We'd have to maybe make 6 or 7 different passes with film for it. But then we kind of worked on it, and shot it maybe 25 feet, maybe 35 feet. Then we kind of did different frames per second, and we wrote different programs so that maybe some of it was thrown off focus. But we came up with a really great shot, which is everything hyperspace, and it was done in one pass. So that was, but then we had we always had fun. So we'd have this shot, I remember, with the X-planes, and they're all in formation. So we would photograph tennis shoes, okay? And we cut them out, and we paste them on the board, and we shot them, and then we plugged it into and they really looked like it. I mean, we just had so much fun sometimes.
That tennis shoe, it was actually auctioned some years ago.
We're joking.
That very tennis shoe, the Nike tennis shoe. Yeah, it probably went for thousands because Ken has talked about that in the past.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to me because it's always been interesting to me hearing those little things. Like also on The Empire Strikes Back, I think Ken was putting potatoes in instead of asteroids, because it was about that perception of the audience at the other end. What could you get away with to maybe, I mean, you were having fun, right? But also to speed up the process, because that's the other thing I think a lot of people don't realize about movie making is, your deadline is super tight. Your budget is super tight. You've got to get this done within that time frame, and you need results, right? And this is probably one of the biggest effects movies at the time. And, you've got to work your way through all those effects within that time frame. Were there multiple teams then of the size of team you were talking about that were knocking out these shots?
Oh yes, we had, I think we had 10 stages going.
Wow.
And then we also had a team that went out and shot on location, the speeder bikes. We had that kind of team going, but basically most of it was shot at Garner Boulevard. And it was we had a night crew. Also, we had a night crew and a day crew that overlapped. So we really never stopped our stages. We did. You're right. We did. We had this time frame, but some of it we had fun because you have to kind of break up that tension. That when you gotta get the shot done, doesn't look good. When you go back and you look at it again, then you try something. That takes time. It's not like, of course, today CGI, everything was done. I mean, look at the puppets. Just why the models, the different sizes of speeder bikes we had to shoot. The optical department was major.
Yeah,
and what was our CGI? Opticals were our CGI.
Yeah. I had the privilege of going and visiting the ranch in April this year.
Oh, really?
And then to the Presidio where Lucasfilm are based now. And actually, they've still got the Kerner building door on the wall in there as like an exhibit.
That's so funny! I love it.
Yeah, you should try and get down there at some point, because seeing some of those matte paintings up close and those models up close. You really see the artistry in that stuff. Some of the matte paintings, of course, like the detail is not super detailed. It's kind of rough in places, but that's the artistry, isn't it? Knowing what the eye needs to see or what the camera needs to see. So you were shooting those speeder bikes then, were you, with the puppets on as well?
Yeah. That was incredibly interesting because the perspective had to be, they were full size, but they weren't full size. But you had to make them appear to be something that was floating, something that was of another, and speeding. We had footage that was background footage that was shot by Garrett Brown, Steadicam, that we could follow. And so that really influenced the way that we shot these on stage. We had that, and he was phenomenal. You could look at that footage today and see those that Steadicam work, which was just, back then, yeah.
Great solution to that problem. I spoke to Garrett actually for this same podcast, and I'm always amazed at people that work in, he came up with that concept, of course, but people that work in any part of the creative industry, particularly in film, the sort of problem solving level that you go through on a daily basis. And I think Garrett said to me, he sat in a hotel for a week and was drawing ideas for this Steadicam, and then got to the end of the week, thought he hadn't solved the problem, looked back, and there on day 2 was the solution. He'd already drawn it and he just didn't realize. Did you have days at ILM where a shot had to be abandoned because it just wasn't working out and you had to think of something else, on your feet and give a solution that maybe wasn't the original shot intended? Or was it a matter of sticking to that precise storyboard and remit that you were given?
I think that would apply to, if you look at the footage, all the star fields that we shot. The first star fields we shot looked like somebody had taken a piece of black paper and punched holes and then shown, and that's what they look like. They look, no matter what we did, we tried it, and then we gave it to opticals, and they kind of jazzed it up. But it was not. It had no depth to it. It was too flat. So our model department came up with a phenomenal solution, and we just loved it. They came up with this big cove on a wooden frame that you could actually step in and walk through to change the bulbs. There were bulbs in back of it. It was all, again, black paper with holes punched in various sizes. But it was on a dimmer, so you could dim those lights. You could bring them up. You could change the color temperature on them. And the great thing was, and this is phenomenal, it was a pretty big star field. And it was a cove. So it gave that impression of depth. The guys came up with this idea in the model shop. Let's put this on rollers. They put it on casters. So we could roll this star field from stage to stage. So you didn't have to build. Yeah, that's kind of, this is what happens when you have a large, or maybe not a large, but a select group of super creative people working together, not just in the camera department, but working together. You talk about matte paintings, and those were hard to fit in sometimes because they looked so spectacular. And if you looked at one frame of a matte painting compared to what we were shooting, they almost look like, oh, this is another film. They looked that spectacular. So you had to really come up with ideas and ways that you could blend these images together. And the star field was just, that was genius as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we rolled that thing all over the place, 10 stages. And also,
cool.
I have to tell you, we would blow up a lot of stuff too, because you have to blow up ships. So we're going to blow them up. Well, we go out in the parking lot at night. We blow up anything. We had this guy, Thane Morris. He was the pyrotechnics guy, and he was terrific. I mean, I could teach it now. I mean, we just blew up everything. And he showed us, the ins and outs. And then a fabulous model maker, Ease Young, came up with an idea of, instead of exploding a building, he imploded it, which was another genius. So we all worked together. And I should mention, while they were coming up with these ideas, we were shooting them so that we could go back and look at what they had done. I don't know what happened to that footage, but boy, that would be great.
I'm sure it's in the archive somewhere. I mean, Lucasfilm kept everything, it's crazy.
Good for him, huh?
Yeah, good for him. I'd love to get in that archive one day. I was so close to, when I was at the ranch, I was like right there, and I didn't quite get in. But I just think Return of the Jedi really was one of those films that sparked a whole generation of people. In fact, I spoke to a guy who works at ILM as a supervisor, VFX supervisor now, Andrew Whitehurst, last night, and he quoted this documentary that was shown here in the UK. He's from the UK as well. It was shown in the US as well, How to Film the Impossible. and it was effects from Return of the Jedi and Temple of Doom, and that seems to have sparked the imagination of that kind of new generation of VFX artists. What happened after Return of the Jedi for you? Did you go to work on like any indie films, or were you done with ILM? What was the process after that?
Well, I have to tell you, looking back, that's a good question. Looking back, because it was my first really, it was big. And I always thought, oh, I just took it for granted that every place is like this, right?
Mm,
It's not.
mm,
So I'll get an offer from a company, another effects company, John Dykstra's company, Apogee. Come and shoot Never Say Never Again, James Bond picture.
yeah.
We shot all the sequences for the game, sequences in Monaco. And that was another interesting place to work, because that was like honestly, nothing can beat ILM. There's no way. But it was a good effects house. I did Dune. I did
Oh,
Never Say
yeah.
Never Again. We did tons and tons of insert work for pictures like The Natural, and I mean, there's so many. I worked for Apogee maybe 3 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And we did a lot of commercials, a lot of promo stuff for HBO. But so there I was in the effects world and realizing, boy, should I go back to ILM? But I was in LA and effects was happening. I worked then for DreamQuest, Boss Films, Robert Abel, Disney. I'm looking at my list. And then people like Canon Films, where we did Invaders from Mars,
Yeah.
Journey to the Center of the Earth. I mean, these were hilarious. Coming from ILM and doing those kind of pictures. Oh, but
Can you just
hey.
rewinding a moment then? Just rewinding a moment then. Can you describe that kind of atmosphere? I mean, you talk about not everywhere's like ILM. I've heard of it as sort of this kind of. It always appears to me that George gave people sort of creative space there, like you talked about a moment ago, where you could go from department to department, try different jobs out and things like that, and kind of feel your way through it. Of course, you've got the pressure of trying to get these shots done, but can you just describe that kind of atmosphere at ILM at that time?
You mean the atmosphere of the creativity of the?
Just like what it was like to work there in terms of like, what did you? I mean, it has to be an organized company, right? And I'm sure
Oh
people like
yes,
Mickey
oh
Herman
yes.
and Rose Dugan and all those people, all those production managers and people were making sure everything was organized. But did you feel like it had a certain kind of collegiate feel kind to it, like a relaxed feel to it as well at the same time?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, we were not only a team, because we spent so much time together.
Mm,
We were really a family. We celebrated holidays. We went out and had happy hour. It was just like a village. It was the most incredible. And I to this day, I'm so fortunate that I
mm,
had a chance to be there in the golden age of special effects, because it was. And working with the model makers and the puppets and the costumes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I interviewed Lorne Peterson, and he said
Uh,
because I'd interviewed Nilo Rodis Jamiro,
uh-huh.
I've
Uh-huh.
done a couple of times now. We've become quite friendly, and I I played Lorne some clips from that interview, and he wrote to me and he said he got kind of teary and just realized, he said, we were working in Florence during the Renaissance. That was how it was. We were at the absolute sweet spot, working in that period. I mean, I hear from people like Lorne and Nilo and Joe Johnston, who I've spoken to a little bit over email, and Phil Tippett and Ken Ralston, Dennis Muir. And I hear this same thing throughout. It was the best time. We had fun. We worked hard. Was there a kind of person within the company that wrangled the social aspect? Was that Rose? Was she the person doing that
Oh,
stuff?
she was our go-to.
social
Uh,
secretary. Right?
exactly. A lot of the guys in the model department, boy, they had fun. They here, let's do this, let's do that, and it was very spur of the moment. We were all together, but I have to tell you, Jamie, I mean, because I had to on 10 stages, I was the only woman cameraman. I don't know how to describe that, but I was always included in everything. And I'd be at the happy hours after work, and if we were going with camera guys, I was the camera guy, but I really wasn't the camera guy. And I was never, and I knew that I was never going to be one of the camera guys. I mean, I just wasn't, because I'm not. But they hired me, so they must have, and they kept me. So that pretty much says that they had the trust in me, which I so appreciated, because when I went back to LA, it was a whole different ballgame, the way I was treated.
Really?
I was not treated like that at ILM. And I should really mention that.
Yeah. Interesting. Because it appears to me that Lucas fostered an environment where everybody was just kind of left to be responsible for themselves, but for their team as well. And of course, he was breaking away from the whole kind of union aspect of being in LA.
Oh, yeah.
And enabling people to cross those borders between roles and things.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. When you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself, talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
So I spoke to Madeline Most, who was in a similar situation to you in that she was a camera assistant, but on set, and she felt that she had to kind of prove herself to these kind of union guys over here in the UK that, a woman, or a girl as they called her, or here comes the girl, that she could carry a camera. So she said she got this huge Panavision camera, strapped it to her back and climbed some scaffolding. And from that point onwards, the guys were like, okay, she's one of us now, kind of thing. But there is that sense that being a woman in the industry at that time, you did have to prove yourself to a certain extent.
And you don't get a lot of, there were no mentors. I had no mentors. There were really very, very, very few women in my union. This was a total men's union. I have to tell you, camera was a boys' club, without a doubt. And, how do you know this stuff before you get into it? You just don't. I mean, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I went into ILM. I didn't want to prove anything, but I knew that I could do this, and I knew I would be very good at it. And you know what? They did too. And that's why they kept me. They didn't have to keep me. There was no government, that you have to hire so many females, because I was the only one. So I give them a lot of credit, but I don't know if they were in LA. I don't know if that would have happened to me if they would hire me. But it doesn't matter.
So what was that environment like, what you walked into in LA after leaving Marin County?
Mm. Well, there's a difference. I found there were a difference in attitude between special effects cameramen and live action cameramen. And the special effects cameraman I worked with, basically, it wasn't too bad. The live action cameramen were horrendous. And horrendous. Although I had more experience, I knew what I was doing.
Mm.
It was just some of the things you would not. And that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I'm
You know,
sure.
I actually did, Jamie, 5 years of music videos.
Right.
And that right there is a whole nother podcast. So
Really, yeah.
I got, but my effects experience, when I came onto the set in LA, I knew exactly what to do.
Mm.
And I was confident. And it showed. And a lot of them tried to sabotage me. They'd set me up when I went to lunch, my equipment. That every time I came back, I checked my equipment because I was set up quite a bit. And this is something that, job's hard enough. It's a very stressful job. But you just, that's what you do. So, yeah.
That's incredible, isn't it? That people are threatened to such an extent about losing their job potentially, or the job of their friend, or whatever it is, because of your gender and because you're coming into a role that is typically a male role, would go to the lengths to sabotage the job potentially.
And a lot worse, but
Yeah.
But you know what? That's a very good point, Jamie. And I want to say that, honestly, when I was going through it, and this helped me, I did not take it personally. It wasn't about me. They were afraid. They were afraid. The world was changing. Their union was changing.
Mm.
They were afraid.
What was changing about their union?
Well, there were more women coming into it. It was the union actually opened their doors to more people, and of all ages. They were even suspect of people who were, over 22, men or women. So the union was changing in a big way, and it was no longer a club. It really wasn't. It was becoming something else, and they were afraid. And so when I realized it wasn't me personally, I kind of thought, these guys are going to have a hard time in years to come.
Yeah.
And they did. A lot of them just quit.
It's good that you could recognize that at that stage, that it wasn't about you and it wasn't personal, and it was as it is, throughout life, isn't it? When you when you meet people like that, it's always about them. I tell my daughter this, my daughters this, whenever there's any bullying at school, I say it's not about you. It's about them. They're showing their colors, and it's more to do with their background and their upbringing and their insecurities and everything else. It's difficult to communicate to a kid, but amazing that you kind of picked that up. What were you, in your 20s at this time?
Oh, yeah. 20s, almost 30. And, you have to realize that some of these guys, well, a lot of these guys, cameramen, they came in through their buddies in the Navy, and that this was, or their fathers or their, uncles. They didn't come in with a solid photographic background. And they felt threatened because they knew that new people were coming in, and they were good, and they knew what they were doing. They weren't.
And they would be found out, wouldn't they? That's the thing. That's why people are worried about when somebody
You
new.
just said it. They were going to be found out, and by God, if they were found out by a woman, this was really bad. So you had to hang in there.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
Yeah.
And I did. I was a cameraman for 22 years.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Congratulations on that. I think that's the staying power is clearly strong in you. The force is strong in you, let's say.
Well, I got that early.
Yeah. Going back to working on Return of the Jedi, there where you've got these amazing models of the Death Star and you've got speeder bikes you've described, and did you always feel like a responsibility to always do your best? Were you driven to always do your best because of all the work that came before it reached your department? Because I work in live TV, so I can be somebody who's playing something to air on the night, but it may have been edited by a team for over 2 weeks. And if I mess up that crucial moment of getting out on the right time, in the right format, I've kind of ruined the work that's come before it. Did you feel that pressure? Did it kind of drive you at all, the artistry that came before your part?
Absolutely. And, of course, our department got the Academy Award for effects.
Yeah.
And that was huge. You'd put that in front of you and you would just go in and do it. And like the Starfield and the different types of shots that you'd come up with, you knew you were pushing it. But if you got it, man, you got it. And we did. We truly did. We'd sit in dailies, and that's another thing. Every morning we'd sit in dailies. And we would look at the footage. Of course, no sound. We'd look at the footage we shot, and we were like, wow. But then we could look at it and say, okay, now next time we do this, this is exactly what we're going to do. Because this could be, and then that could be. But I got to tell you something real quick, too, because this is funny. So one of the first days that I sat in dailies, okay, I go in dailies, and of course, all the, sitting there new, and they turn off the lights and they start running the dailies. And all of a sudden, I hear all of these guys making all of these. Now, there's no sound of this film, these effects. And they're making all of these effects. And I'm like, I look around and I see a bunch of, no, this is not being demeaned, 10-year-old guys having the time of their lives. And I'm thinking, whoa, these guys, they are so lucky because look at what they're doing and they're getting paid for it. And they just, and this was all the time. They'd make these gigantic blow ups and, and they'd stand up and they react to this film like, wow. Oh,
that's great. I think there's a moment in the end of the Light and Magic documentary on Disney Plus where I think Phil Tippett says, his daughter says she doesn't want to grow up because it means she'll have to stop playing. And he said, no, just get a job in the film industry and you can carry on playing for the rest of your life.
Well, that was it. That was it. And they, you can't get any better than that. And I realized I'm going to have some fun here. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever get to see the on-set stuff to see how your shots kind of fit in with what was already shot? Were you able, on the Moviola, for instance, were you able to see that kind of cut into the footage that had been shot in Elstree?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And when we slated everything, we put all the information down, who the cameraman, who the operator, the assistant. So we knew our shots. And I think that was a big plus because if you sometimes some of the shots, they start to all look alike and you can't really, you think, did I shoot that? Was that on our stage? But if it's slated, it's your footage. And that was another draw to be the best. I'm thinking, oh man, the way do they see this in dailies? Wait till I see this in dailies. And I'd say to Peter, come on, and he'd say to me, okay, now this is what we're going to do now. And it was, you couldn't wait to get to work the next day because, man, they're going to have the best shot in the whole damn dailies, right? Yeah. And after about a month and a half, I'm there making all these sound effects and I'm thinking, oh boy, I drank the Kool-Aid or what did I do, But
Wasn't there? It was Return of the Jedi, wasn't it? If I'm remembering correctly, where there was a particular Friday where George cut a ton of stuff out of the
oh,
movie.
oh,
Do you remember
Black
that?
Friday, Black Friday, yes,
Yeah.
and we were disappointed, not quite understanding if it was a money thing because
Mm,
most of it goes back to money.
mm,
But you know, you're he's the boss, and
mm,
that's that. And honestly, he was the guy with the vision. I mean, you know, I worked for Richard Edlin at Boss Films. He was another one of my supervisors, and he was tops. But working for Boss, working for Apogee, and then working for ILM, those three companies, you could see that vision at ILM was revolutionary, to say the least. So we took what he said. That's it.
yeah. Do you remember any shots that had to go that you wished were in there? I mean, it's a long time ago now, Marianne.
No, no. I know. It was a long time ago. No, not offhand. I don't.
But it was there. It was a decision, like you say, a decision by the man himself, and it was to better the story and to make the film more efficient and readable by the audience, and all of those things. When you went to other effects houses, did you kind of notice that absence of George, as it were, as the overarching kind of creator and guide? Well, he's like a Yoda-like guide by this time.
Oh yeah. Yes, I did. And once you've worked at a place like ILM, everything what you're trying to compare it to, you can't compare it to. But the other effects houses did not have that consistency.
Mm,
I remember shooting at Boss Films, The Abyss.
mm,
And The Abyss, if you look at it, it's not really shot in tanks of water. It's shot in rooms of smoke. We had shot him at a site in Marina del Rey where we plastic coated around all the duvetined all the stages, and then we pumped smoke in there, and then we put the models on a track, and it really did, looking at dailies, it really did look like it was underwater, especially since you remember that was shot in 65mm.
yeah, yeah.
So, you're going to see, however, consistency was not there from shot to shot. And shooting it in 65, you could really see that. So the consistency in the work from day to day was not the same caliber.
And what do you put that
But
down
wasn't
to?
the drive to do that as well.
Right. Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Even when you've got a big director like James Cameron kind of driving the ship, he's not necessarily driving the effects part of the ship.
Yes. I remember going out and shooting background plates for The Abyss with James Cameron, and we were on top of a tower shooting. Also, I should mention in The Abyss, to a Boss Films credit, that was the first underwater blue screen as well. That movie, that was really huge. But to go back to James Cameron, when I was shooting background plates with him, he knew what he wanted. He knew what he wanted, and we had at that point because we had video assist. You can remember that video assist playback. We could look at the footage that we shot, and he'd say, "This is not going to work. This is not going to cut into it. This is not going to work." When you take those background plates back to Boss, you're not going to be able to fit this footage in. It's not going to be, again, consistent. And boy, he was right. So he knew what he wanted. He's very talented. And we took quite a while to shoot background plates. I think he was the toughest guy that I worked for shooting background plates, other than when we were in ILM.
And The Abyss, of course, was a film where the industry was starting to turn into something else because the arrival of the CG character that
Yes,
Mark Tapei and Steve Williams and those
yes.
guys put together. Did you feel that transition beginning to happen, and did you have any concern about your future in the industry at that point?
I did a bit, Jamie, honestly. And I thought to myself that, so I started to do more and more live action. That's when I got into music videos. I did TV. I did Bob Newhart, Star Trek. I did TV series. I did commercials. And I started to get more into live action work. I actually did some work for Wild World of Sports. I did the
Mm.
Baja 500, the Baja 1000,
Did you?
Long Beach Grand Prix. Oh my, I love that. That was so much
Uh-huh.
fun.
Well, that's what I
Well,
did. I work as an editor of Formula One motor
oh
racing. So
really? Oh,
yeah,
that
that's
is
been my
that's a
job.
blast, isn't it? Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
it.
it's good fun.
But I'm going to tell you, it was not as creative. It was a
Mm.
more of a technician's job.
Yeah.
That job for me was more
Hmm.
more technical. Working in effects was super creative with a technical background,
Mm.
and that you did not find in live action. You did not
Mm.
find.
Yeah, I guess you've got a very sort of limited remit, particularly in live sport and stuff. What with regards to the music videos, I know obviously a lot of big directors have come out of music videos, um, and out of commercials as well. I guess Ridley Scott probably being the most famous one. Was there ever a feeling on your part to go into directing at any point? Did you ever direct anything?
No, 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 I did not. I didn't really have an interest in directing, although I wanted to get out of assistant work. I wanted to be
Mm.
an operator. I wanted to do nothing but operate. To me, operating was, the assistants really took over most of the technical,
Mm.
especially the first assistant,
Hmm.
focus and second assistant took care of most of the camera equipment and the support equipment for cranes and so and Steadicam and things like that. But
Mm.
the operator was the eye of the director. Worked closely with the director. And that is the area that I really decided I wanted to go. And I did operate on a couple things. But it wasn't enough. It was few and far between, I
Mm.
operated a little bit on a picture called Dune. That was we
Mm.
shot in Mexico City.
Yeah.
And what was 4 months of, whoa, Dino De Laurentiis,
Yeah, well, I've there's a
David
great book.
Lynch,
I'll send you. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a great book by a guy called uh, Kenneth George Godwin, I think his
Uh-huh.
name is, and he wrote about. He was tasked with doing all the behind the scenes stuff, having had no experience. He was given this brand new HD for the time Panasonic camera, and he went down to Mexico, and he's written this kind of diary of his experience down there. I'm sure it would tally with some of the things that are
Oh,
going around in your
I'll
mind,
tell you.
and at the end of it, because the film turned out into be a little bit of a mess,
Oh, yeah.
De Laurentiis just destroyed all of this footage, so it's never been seen. And people like me who are behind the scenes, fans, and I'm sure, like other people that have that similar interest, we've all dreamt that one day these tapes are going to be uncovered to see truly what went on that film. What
I
was it
know.
like down there? Was it
Oh, oh,
chaos? The chaos
oh, it's
that I've
wild.
heard about?
I'm not kidding you. Wild. I mean, we had an Italian camera crew, we had a British camera crew, we had an American camera crew, and then we had the Mexican camera crew. So and then we had an Italian restaurant, of course, two Italian, as Dino De Laurentiis, and then we had a Mexican restaurant. Then we had the British pub. I mean, I have to tell you, the movie is not about the movie. The movie is about the making of it,
Yeah.
because with and then we had the Mexican prop department and model making department, and they
Mm,
made this gigantic worm, the
mm.
gigantic worm.
Yeah, yeah.
And it looked like somebody's gigantic mattress painted green, and it was on springs underneath. And so when the director called, you know, roll, all the Mexicans would jump up and down on these springs, and it would make the worm move. And I I looked at this stuff like, whoa, but and looking at that footage, you just, with Sting in a loincloth and Wilt Chamberlain. And, I mean, and it was, David Lynch. It was out there, but it was
I
fun.
was just going to say out there, yeah. And what was it like operating for David Lynch? Was it fun? Was he, because he was under a lot of pressure there, and I think he realized,
A
didn't
lot.
he, that he was out of his depth in terms of the effects side of the movie.
I totally agree with you. That's why
Mm,
they had a British effects camera crew and an American effects camera crew, which was a smart move.
mm.
But there again, you have too many camera crews. It doesn't look like anything's put together, and it didn't. It looked like a bunch of sometimes it was shot so fast it looked like music video, and then it would slow down, and then the worm would come, and then. But David Lynch, I got to hand it to him. He was great. He was great. He was a lot of fun. He was great. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the particular scene you operated on?
I would have to say that the worm sequences were the most memorable.
Mm,
The worm was the star. I mean, if
yeah.
you look at it today, it's the worm,
Mm,
and the fact that the worm was built by people that had no idea how to build effects. I mean, and rightfully so.
mm.
But the backlot at Cherubusco, Mexican studio, was all the rocks and all the fake stuff, and you go, and it looked like it was going to be blown over. It looked like a scene from Blazing Saddles. Where they have that thing that's propped up. I mean, don't move too fast because that scenery's going away. And it
It was all
was,
pretty funky stuff then. Yeah.
oh, it was hilarious. Like I said, that's the movie. That would have made a phenomenal documentary.
Yeah, it's a shame that footage doesn't exist. Is there a particular scene that you remember operating on though that stays in your mind other than I mean, did you operate on the worm scenes, or is there another
I
scene
did.
that you
I operated on the worm scenes, and I did a lot of the close-up footage of what was that actor's name? Kyle
Kyle
McCullough.
MacLachlan, yeah.
Yes, a lot of him, and then the woman relationship that they had together. So I
Yeah.
shot that, but mostly because of my background in effects, they put me as an operator in most of the effects, a lot of the effects shots. So I
Right,
not only
okay.
assisted, I also operated, and because it was in Mexico, hey, that was great.
Okay, so you weren't sort of constricted by the union aspect.
And what they didn't know, they didn't know, and I wasn't going to tell them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not getting 2 paychecks, so why, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
why?
And I guess quite a relief to get out of Mexico and get away from the movie to a certain extent because of the madness.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And does an experience like that kind of make you really pick and choose what your next project's going to be, or are you just happy for the work to come along and to continue working?
Well, sometimes it's a combination. And because I was getting started in live action, I felt that I needed to do a little bit more live action because the effects pictures were um, still being made, but I could see there was a big change
Mm,
in a lot of it. I mean, you couldn't help it because they cost so much money and time to put
mm,
together.
mm,
And people in production uh, above the line weren't really willing to go there. There wasn't going to be another Jedi somewhere else other than ILM. So it's either go back to ILM or, you know, branch out. And I wanted to operate. So I felt that. And I played that, a lot of music videos I operated. So that
mm,
gave me a chance to do that. But if there was something really, I'm trying to think if there was a movie that I really, really wanted to be on. I like Hunt for Red October.
oh
We
yeah,
shot,
yeah,
yeah, we shot that at
I like
Boss.
that movie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that was actually That was the movie. I'm sorry, I'll go back, correct myself. That was the movie we shot in rooms of smoke, those ships, submarines. I also went down to San Pedro and operated on some of those submarine shots we shot in water tanks.
Right, yeah.
So that wasn't that water work was tough. I mean, you have VistaVision cameras that you have to put in a housing, waterproof housing, drop them down in a football field of water, and you go with it. And it's 1,000-foot load, and that doesn't last that long. So that was a huge challenge to do that kind of work as well. And I wouldn't have gotten a chance to do that if I just stayed in live action. But look at that stuff today. I mean, they can do that in about 30 seconds or whatever,
Yeah. That was John McTiernan, wasn't it? I think.
Yes.
Hunt for Red October. Yeah. Was there a particular director that you kind of, whether it was in music videos or whether it was in movies, that you kind of felt a kind of understanding with? I think sometimes, we describe it as having this shorthand with somebody where you meet somebody, you immediately kind of connect and you kind of get each other. Was there somebody that stands out to you?
Yes, there was. It was a gentleman, a very, very famous, David Fincher.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he started at ILM when I did.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
what movie was that?
He wasn't a director he was not a director.
Mm.
He came from everybody like us. I mean, he was working class, And then I worked with him later on some music videos, and I really admired him. And he's gone on to do some incredible things.
Yeah.
But it was all him. So I enjoyed that.
He seems to be one of those directors that is a perfectionist, because he straddles that sort of line between a technical genius and a creative genius as well. So he's aware of having feet in both camps at the same time. It must be difficult to work for a director like that, but also rewarding when you pull off the shot or you get what he wants.
Exactly. And to have the respect for someone who you have to work pretty damn hard to get to the spot where he was. And you have to be talented. And he certainly is. You look at some of the films that are shot today, whether they're effects, but mostly with their effects. And you don't see that creativity or the technical, because everything is so generated. And when it's so generated, it waters down the type of people that are hired. And hopefully that will change. Will now people making their own things and podcasting or Instagram, however they want to view it. But the creative and the technical, if you can do that, that's a plus. But people don't want to take the time to learn. I mean, when we were cameramen back then, we had meters, we had we had to deal with the labs, we had to know our timing lights for each sequence. We had to shoot before every scene, Jedi, anything, FX, live action, color bars. We worked with the labs. We knew. Well, first of all, there's no labs left, but you don't have that background. You don't have that skill that you had to have as cameraman. You had to know how to light. You really did.
Yeah, there is a loss of discipline, I think probably is the word that describes it. I've noticed it even in my industry. When I went to college, I learned the engineering side, the technical side of things. And now I work with young people who've just been brought on because, they might know somebody in the industry, which does happen. There is a nepotistic nature to it always. But when the shit hits the fan, they don't know how to solve the problem because they don't know what's causing the problem. They don't know the workarounds. They just kind of stop dead in their tracks. I totally agree with you on that. Well, so you said you had 30 years in the industry. Was there a point where you moved on to a second career, or did you move on to a different phase of life? What kind of ended your time in the film industry, or was it retirement?
Actually, when my ex-husband and I had our daughter, that I realized, you cannot do 16-hour days.
Yeah,
And he was a cameraman as well. So he was
right.
on location. He was a live action cameraman. He was on location all the time. So someone had to be home. So
Mm,
I did work part-time still in the film business. And while I took care of our daughter. So I kind of eased out of it a bit. But, you in an industry like that, you don't ease out. You have to either stay in it and be relevant to go on, or, accept the fact that you're going to get, secondary jobs, which I did. I just got, commercials and little bits and pieces. Then we moved to San Luis Obispo outside of LA. And I still went back and forth. In fact, when we first moved to San Luis, I was on a contract for a TV show. So I went to LA a lot. But then, having a young daughter, you just can't leave home if there's nobody else there. So I stayed home and I became an art teacher, which, that was my background. I have a master's in fine arts, and
nice.
I did that for a couple years, and to raise our daughter, it was great.
Mm,
Then I went
yeah.
back in between being a teacher and did music videos. My ex-husband and we did, I don't know, 20, 30. Remember those big concerts, those multi-camera concerts,
Yeah.
Pink Floyd, and you go to different
Mm,
cities. And well, we did tons and tons of tons. We went to Russia and did Billy Joel live in Russia in
no
1988
way.
before the wall came down. So,
Wow.
I kind of got out of effects. Part-time went into just live action. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I, as I said, I work in the TV industry, and I know couples that work in the TV industry, and I cannot work out how they manage their lives, because they're both working, like you say, 15, 16-hour days. It's just crazy. I mean, luckily I'm now in a situation where I'm not going around the globe once a year to 25
Oh,
different
yeah.
locations. I'm doing it remotely now, because since COVID, they figured out how to do my job remotely,
Oh,
which
that's
has
wonderful.
probably saved a lot of marriages and a lot of
Oh,
living.
you're right. I wish he could have done camera remotely, but hey, that doesn't work.
Yeah, well, do you know, there's been experiments over the years with Formula One of a guy standing there with some pan bars in London and panning a camera that's in Brazil. And of course, it doesn't work, because what does a camera operator do to see what else they can get in their shot? They take their head out of the viewfinder and look around, don't they?
Oh, no, that's too
You
funny.
can't do that. Or you might hear a car, its engine is wrong, and you think, oh, I've got to pick up that car. You can't hear that stuff, So I'm sure they'll get there in the end, but I want to be out of the industry by then.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've done an hour here, Marion. I think we could talk forever on different aspects of your career, whether it's the music videos, the movies, being an art teacher as well. My wife's a teacher, was a teacher as well.
Well,
Um, yeah, maybe that's another episode, as you said earlier on, entirely. But I really appreciate you giving your time today, Marianne, and fascinated to talk to you, because
oh, this
you
was
know
fun.
people think that you don't exist because you've got 2 entries on IMDb, but you've talked about this catalog of movies. You need to get on that website and amend that. I think you can do
I
that.
think you put that to me when you texted me the other day. It says not a lot on you, and I thought, oh
Yeah.
my god.
Yeah, but you've got quite a catalog of movies you worked on there, and the remit of this podcast really is me talking to people whose work I admire, and I admire that effects work in Return of the Jedi is what sparked my interest as a kid. I was like 8 years old or something and got the behind the scenes book and all of that stuff. So,
Oh yeah.
from this side of the camera, or this side of the screen, thank you very much for your work, and appreciate your time today.
Oh, well, thank you. This has been fun, and thanks again.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with Maryan Infield. Thank you, Maryan, for your time. I'm aware that we recorded this a long time ago, Maryan, but I'm glad it's finally up. I had some time-dependent ones that kept getting in front of this episode, but I'm glad it's up now. It's always great to hear from people who were right there on the front lines of visual effects, particularly from those practical years. I just find it really interesting, people navigating their way through the industry. And I love also hearing about that camaraderie at ILM. It really does sound like a unique time and place in film history. I mean, ILM is still a great company now. There's still a lot of camaraderie, but I think there's just something really comforting to know that there were good people working there. People were treated well, and that ethos still continues today. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor, subscribe. There's YouTube now, Spotify, Pocket Casts, Apple, wherever you want to get the podcasts. Share it with a fellow film fan, just WhatsApp it to somebody. Maybe leave a review, as I said in the intro. It really does help this podcast reach more people. Right, that's it for now. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you can join me again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
We are being way mean.